this is going to be an incredibly boring video. So go grab some caffeine, some coffee, grab a little Skittles. Let's wake up, folks. You will learn a ton in this video. If you are considering selling or purchasing a home, you need to understand certain terms in a contract. I will link in the description box down below a list of questions that you need to be asking your realtor, whether you're selling your property or whether you're purchasing a property, and you want them to show you, like with their finger, the answer to the questions that we're going to discuss in this video. And once again, these questions will be linked down in the description box down below. Every purchase offer has a price. Now, I know you're like, yeah, Audra, we know that. But make sure you know where it is in the contract. There's been some of you that called me this week saying, oh, I signed a contract and my realtor told me one price, but I signed a different price. And I don't know if there was some marble mouthing going on and it wasn't clearly communicated. But before you sign any contract, make sure you know where that price is on the contract. Like with your eyes, have them present it. How long is the term of the agreement? Is it 30 days? Is it 15 days? Is it a designated date on a calendar? Now, for those of you that don't know this, if a contingency period, which we'll get to in just a minute, or a closing date lands on a weekend, it automatically rolls to the next business day. So for those of you who are really on a time crunch and need to move early, you need to take that in consideration when counting down the close of the transaction date. Now, this is really something you want to pay attention to. You want to make sure your buyer's putting a reasonable amount of earnest money deposit towards a transaction, because if they were to back out, you want to have some extra money for liquidated damages. And if they're putting a low amount down, if they back out of the contract, there's not that much at risk for them. So I would consult with your realtor to find out what's, standard in your area, but pay attention to that. If you see, at least when I see a buyer making a really low earnest money deposit amount, I'm kind of like, hey, do you know what you're doing? Or are you thinking you're going to back out? So pay attention to that one. Every contract in every part of the nation has contingency periods designated in their purchase contracts. So I'm going to throw out a few. There's a lot of them, but I'll just throw out a few and I'll give you some examples. And of course, I'm going to detail all this in the link down below that you're going to print and you're going to ask your realtor about. So common contingency periods are buyer's investigation contingencies. That means like the home inspection. Maybe you want a roof inspection. There is a appraisal contingency. There is a loan contingency. There is a contingency on the sale of your property. There is HOA documents. There is a natural hazard disclosure contingency. There's seller disclosure contingencies. There are a whole heck of a lot of contingencies, okay? What the heck is a contingency? So replace the word contingency with the only if clause. Every state has the contingency clause written in their contracts. So I'll give you a few examples to help you with that, okay? So let's use the buyer's investigation contingency. So your buyer has a certain duration of time to do all of their investigations. And once they are satisfied, they remove that contingency. So what they're saying when they're making their offer is they're saying, hey, seller, I want to buy your house only if I'm satisfied with the buyer's investigations that I'm going to complete. And there's usually like a 10, 15 day duration of time. So they have 10 to 15 days to be satisfied, and they're only going to purchase the house only if they're satisfied with the condition of the property. Let's give you another example. Hey, seller, I want to purchase your house only if it appraises. That's considered the appraisal contingency. Or how about this one? Hey, seller, I want to buy your property only if I can get loan approval. You guys see how that works? That would be considered a loan contingency. So when you hear the word contingency, just replace it with only if. They're making an offer based on certain contingencies or certain things that they need to satisfy before they can move forward. Here's another one. I want to buy your house, but it's contingent on me selling my own personal residence or my departing residence. Contingent on me selling my property, okay? So what they're really saying is, hey, I'll buy your house only if you will cooperate with me selling my house first. These are contingencies. They're only if clauses in the contract. So when you are given a contract, you want to know what those dates are. And those dates are usually not designated dates, they're days. And each one of these contingency periods has a day associated with it, like it's either 10 day, 15 day. And when that buyer makes an offer, those days start counting down as soon as you have a fully executed contract, meaning that every single party has signed the contract. The date of the last signature is when those days start counting down. Now, once you have a fully executed document, the date of the last signature is day 0. The next day is day 1. So if you have a 10-day buyer investigation contingency, the date of the contract signature is day 1, and you start counting down those days. Now, I've had a lot of you reach out to me and send me some of your contracts and say, Audra, I don't know my contingency period ends. It's really important that you know when that contingency period ends. And the reason why that's so important to know when that expiration of that contingency ends is because your buyer is required to sign off on these contingencies. They don't automatically go away. Your buyer has to manually sign a form called contingency removal. And there is going to be a date that you're going to be asking your realtor when all contingencies are removed. That means the loan, the appraisal, the HOA docs, all the stuff. And after your buyer signs off on that contingency removal, their earnest money deposit is at risk. Did you hear me on that? Their earnest money deposit is at risk. It doesn't automatically get given to you if they back out, but it is at risk. We'll explain that in just a minute. Another good reason why you need to know when these contingency periods are done is because you don't want to be stuck with a stupid buyer that has no intention of purchasing your property. Just because the date comes doesn't mean you as a seller can just back out. No, you as a seller have to put them on notice. You're going to say, hey, it's day 10 and you haven't signed off on your contingencies. So are you going to send it over or not? And if they go silent on you, you give them this thing called a notice to perform. And you as the seller, once you give that notice to perform, that buyer has 48 hours to remove that contingency, or you as a seller can then back out. You understand the significance of that? You have to know your dates. You have to know your contingency dates, okay? One of the most important part of the contract, in my opinion. Once again, I will link down below an outline that you want your agent to fill out for you so you understand what these contingency periods are and the date when they're due. Now, you all know that I'm trying to get to 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Please subscribe to my channel. You know I'm not going to give up, and I'll start shutting up, I promise. Once I get to 50,000 subscribers, I'll shut up for the end of the year. So help a girl out, would you? Now, in that purchase contract, there is an area for seller credit. So make sure you ask your realtor if the buyer is requesting any credit. So in our area, for example, termite clearance is a big deal. And the sellers oftentimes don't want to move out and then do the termite clearance. So we give them a credit to cover that themselves. So ask your realtor what other credits are involved. Another common one is some of the buyers might ask for some personal property. Now, if you have a loan, there's very little things that you can put into a contract because they're considered personal property, and lenders hate including personal property in any transaction. However, if it's all cash, you can ask for whatever you want. But ask your realtor, what things are they including? What personal items are they including in the contract, or any credits? You need to know that. Now, in California, the buyer has 3 days to show proof of funds. Now, I'm going to go a step further and say, don't even mess with that. Ask for proof of funds or a pre-qual letter. You also want proof of funds for the earnest money deposit before you even sign the contract, okay? It's really important that you're not monkeying around with somebody that has no business purchasing your house. And you're not going to rely on your realtor to tell you, yeah, we got the proof of funds. You want to see them with your eyes, like, oh, that's their bank account that has their names on the bank account, and the names are important. Okay, I can't tell you how many crazy stories I've heard where they show proof of funds. The name is not on the banking statement. It's somebody else's banking statement. I mean, who knows where that thing came from, okay? And let's talk about that pre-qualification letter. You want your realtor to be calling the lender and asking specific questions. Now, here's something else that might be really helpful. You as the seller can always call their lender also. You ask the questions. And you'll know right away whether or not you're dealing with the ding-a-ling lender, right? They should be able to answer these questions very clearly. You want to know how much money the buyer's putting down towards the loan. You want to know if they're self-employed or whether they have a steady job. That buyer needs to prove to you that they can purchase the house. I can't tell you how many times you guys are calling me going, hey, Audra, I don't know if this buyer can actually purchase the property. And they're already like 25 days down the transaction. Listen, you have no business opening a transaction unless you're convinced or have good supporting documents or comfort with the purchasing power of your buyer. You need to do that up front. Really important. A lot of these agents don't do that. If they don't do it, you do it. You call the lender. I love that. Let's talk briefly about seller-buyer counteroffers. It's important to know that when your buyer presents an offer, it's probably not going to be perfect. So you as a seller are going to counter their offer. So what you're saying in that seller counteroffer is, I'm agreeing to everything in your offer that you sent me, except what's outlined in the seller counteroffer. So the seller counteroffer overrides what's written in that original offer. And then if the buyer sends their counter to your seller counter, then whatever you agree to on their offer then overrides what's in that seller counter. But they're all linked together. So some of you have reached out to me saying, why am I signing all this stuff? It's because each one of those documents are linked together. Now we're going to talk about a few pitfalls on these contracts, okay? First one being that earnest money deposit. You as a seller do not let anybody in your property. I don't even care if it's an appraiser. No one comes into your property to do any investigations until that earnest money deposit or that initial deposit is in escrow or title. That buyer needs to wire that money into the title or escrow company, because you don't want them coming to your property, have their home inspector come in, ruin something, and then say, oh, sorry, we're not interested in the property, and out they go. And there's nothing you have as liquidated damages to cover any mishaps the home inspector might have caused, okay? They have no business doing any inspection on your property unless that earnest money deposit is in escrow or title. You guys feel me on this? It's interesting. Most buyers don't want to part with their earnest money deposit, okay? They don't want to part with it. So they want to do all their inspections. And then if they don't like the house, oh, well, we don't have to release that earnest money deposit from escrow or title. And so they want to do all their investigations without putting earnest money in escrow or title. Heck no, don't do that. You're crazy if you allow that to happen. And you realtors out there, you know better. This is one of the biggest pitfalls. Do not make this mistake. If you are a seller, you're going to fill out your seller disclosures before you even accept an offer. What's in these seller disclosures, usually a state has their form that you as a seller will write down everything you know about the property that you're aware of, any defects, any upgrades, yada, yada, yada. You want to make sure that it's completed before you even accept an offer, because you want to give that to the buyer as soon as possible. The buyer is given an additional 5 days to review any seller disclosures once it's provided to them. So let's say there's a 10-day contingency period and the buyer signs off on all the contingencies and you forgot to hand over the solar lease details. Well, guess what? That buyer has an additional 5 days to review the solar details. And if they want to back out of the contract, they can. And what's really common in California anyway, I don't know about these other states, is we have this thing called the agent visual inspection, okay? Meaning that agent has to go into the property. We have to fill out what we notice about the property, which is so lame, like we're not inspectors, but whatever. And if we don't get that in on time, that is considered a disclosure. So if you're working with a real estate agent, they need to have that disclosure filled out. Because guess what? If they're late and they hand over their agent visual inspection disclosure past the contingency period, your buyer has an additional 5 days. You guys following me on this? So you want to get as much information to your buyer up front. Do not make this mistake. It is just awful where the buyer is all excited because all contingencies are removed. They forgot something, or the agent forgot to get whatever to them on time. And then all of a sudden the buyer has the ability to back out without risking any earnest money deposit. I get this a lot. A lot of you are calling me. I'm like, what the heck? So they'll say, hey, my buyer is not closing the deal. Like they're supposed to, close the deal on a certain date and we're 5 days after the fact. Can I just back out and take their earnest money deposit? And I'm like, well, are your contingencies removed? I'm like, well, what's that? I'm like, oh, well, now you know. And I'm like, well, did you give the buyer a demand to close? And they're like, well, what's that? So you as a seller are obligated to commit to the contract unless you put the buyer on notice for lack of performance. So if they are not closing on the date that they're supposed to, and you're not feeling real comfortable the deal's going to get done, you can give them a demand to close. It's actual formal document. You put them on notice, and the notice pretty much states that you have 48 hours to close the deal or you can back out. Now, you don't have to, but you now have the ability to back out. Powerful. But remember, If you don't have all those contingencies signed off on by the buyer and they back out of the contract and those things aren't signed off, you don't get any of that earnest money deposit. So let's talk about that earnest money deposit. All you buyers out there probably think, oh, I'm going to put money into escrow or title, and if I don't release contingencies, and that money just automatically goes back to me. No, it does not. That money only gets released if both the buyer and the seller agree to have it released back to the buyer. And if you signed off on all contingencies, you still can get your money back if the seller agrees to sign off on it. So buyers, don't be jerky, okay? Do not be jerky to these sellers. Be respectful. It's always a good motto to be respectful to everybody in my book, okay? You don't want a mad seller to say, hey, you wasted all my time and I don't care. I'm not releasing your money to you. Yeah, I don't care if you haven't signed off on all these contingencies. And as a buyer, your only recourse is to go the arbitration mediation route, which is timely and expensive. And some of you smarty pants out there are going to say, well, we can just put a lien on their property. Some sellers are like, go for it. I don't care. I'm not going to sell my house anyway. So let's all be respectful. Let's not make offers on properties we're not really serious about. Just be careful about that earnest money deposit. It doesn't automatically get released. To you buyers out there and sellers, you should know that as well. If there's any damages or any issues with your property, you can hold back their money, even if they haven't removed contingencies, and negotiate with them. You're the one that has them over the barrel. It's not the other way around. You do have some rights. Another pitfall that a lot of these contracts are canceling over is home insurance. So in my area, we have really bad fires, and a lot of our insurance companies are backing out of our area like every single day. So you need to make sure your buyer can get home insurance early on in the process. And that is one of those contingencies. I would write it in there, okay, that the buyer get bound, meaning their policy bound and secured before they remove those contingencies. Because at the end of the day, you want to sell your house, right? You don't want to go after their earnest money deposit. You want to close the contract. So you will require proof of insurance before those contingencies are signed off. And of course, I will stick down below in the details those questions so that your agent can ask it. But you don't want to wait till the very last minute. You're about to close the sale and then your buyer just can't get home insurance. It's really a problem. Be aware of it. It's not fun. And of course, if you're working with a realtor, they should have certain insurance companies that they can recommend for your buyer to try to get insurance coverage. Now, a lot of you are under contract right now with your house and you have no idea about the dates and all the things that I just talked about, okay? So please, go download my little, checklist down below, ask your realtor to fill it out, and micromanage them. It really is that important. Okay, that's it for me today. I know you're going to subscribe. I'll start leaving you alone. Anyway, thanks for supporting me in my channel. I really appreciate your support, and I really love your comments, so thank you. I've been so busy. I'm really going to do my best to answer some of your comments, but once again, I just want you to know that it means the world to me. All the support that you've given me over the last few years means the world to me. All right, have a good one, and I'll see you in the next one.